So thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Michael Rothschild. I'm a horse leader and a sidewalker, and I've been working at Hearts and Horses for about 2 years. It will be helpful for me to know a little bit about what you guys have done with Hearts and Horses so far. So if you could just give me a real quick overview, that would be very helpful.
I've pulled weeds.
Okay.
It's kept me very busy. I've just begun, so it's all brand new for me.
And Shirley, how about you?
I'm a horse leader with the Changing Leads program.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've done a couple of those too. That's my favorite class. Okay, so let me give you a little bit of background information about what we're going to do with this workshop. So we've got a couple of different pieces that we're going to talk about. Can you bring up that screen, Emmy?
Trying to figure out how I get to the next. There we go.
There it is. So I'm going to spend a little time telling you what we're going to talk about. Then I wanted to talk a little bit about any situations you had run into working with riders that presented specific challenges for you. And Shirley, it sounds like that's going to come down to you.
Uh-oh.
I have 6 pre-planned scenarios that we can talk about. So Shirley, if you don't have anything, that's fine. We have plenty of stuff we can talk about without that.
That's fine. I just have to jog my memory.
Sure.
Yeah, okay.
Then I'm going to do probably 15-minute at the most overview of the traits. I'll tell you a little bit about where they came from, and then I'm going to go through and talk a little bit about each one, just so we're all sort of starting from the same place. Then we'll take those traits and think about how they might work in the scenarios we've got. And then if we have time at the end, we can get specific about scenarios that you guys have run into or things that you're thinking about, and talk about how we could apply the traits to those. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. So to start with, Shirley, do any of those situations come to mind for you as we think about them? I just want to jot those down before we start.
What situations?
Specific challenges you've had with riders, situations that came up where you weren't really sure what the best way to handle it was.
We had an interesting, I'll just think of one to begin with. We had an interesting rider who came in and was just absolutely frozen afraid. And I was working with Rachel, and she did find on the ground, but to get on the horse was really, really scary. And it was, Fiona, which can be scary. Anyway, she didn't know Fiona was scary. But anyway, it took a lot, and she really almost went into a complete panic, you know, breathing and that kind of thing before she was able to get on. I think Rachel did a beautiful job because she just let it ease and said, you know, we'll do it if we can, and if not, but everybody was behind her, and she finally did get on. And then Fiona started doing her stuff. But what ended up happening by the end, she shifted to Lass, and Lass, being as mellow as she is, really, really helped her. And she, by the end, she was saying, can I ride by myself? And it was just a gradual progression of getting over that fear. So it was a real big fear situation.
Okay. Yeah, I'll be using an example in a little while of somebody who had a similar set of circumstances. Anything else come to mind?
Trying to think. Let's start there.
Okay.
Then if something pops in, I'll let you know.
That sounds great. Okay, we'll get back to those at the tail end of the session. One of the things that's a high priority for me is making sure that what we do here is useful for you. This is not an opportunity for me to talk for an hour and you to go away thinking, oh, that was sort of interesting. Let's get on to the next thing. I'm really hoping that this will give you a different perspective on working with the riders and a different set of tools that you can use as you interact with them and help them with their issues. If you have questions as we go along, feel free to use the chat box, and Emmy will be keeping an eye on that, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. Let's see, the session's scheduled for an hour. This is actually the third time that we've done it, and both of the other times when we got into discussion, people got really excited about it, and it went on longer than that. And at the hour point, Brenda and I said to folks, you know, we're willing to stay a little longer if you want to. If you can't, if you need to leave, that's fine. So I will be checking back in with you guys as we get to the end of things. And if it looks like we could use more time, we can talk about whether we want to do that or not. Okay. Let me get started with telling you a little bit of where this material came from. I first ran into this material as part of my graduate program back in the early 70s. And this was some research that was done by a psychologist named Sid Wolf. And he had been looking around at the results.
Whoops, lost you. Can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Whatever. Yeah.
I got a little note that said my microphone had stopped working, so thanks for letting me know. I could have talked for an hour and not known that you didn't hear a word. So this guy had noticed that there were differences in how patients responded to the people who were working with them. Some of the patients got better. Some of the patients didn't really change very much. And some of the patients actually got worse. And he was confused about why that was true, but it was true across different positions like psychiatrists, psychologists, counselors, and social workers. And it was also true depending on what their approach was, whether they were Rogerians or Freudians or whatever approach they used, they still had this same range of results. So he decided to look deeper and see what was going on, and he identified 10 different traits. And as he looked at those traits and the helpers, he found that the people who used those traits effectively had much better outcomes with the people they were trying to help. And the people who had the worst outcomes were the people who didn't use those traits at all. So he then wrote up those traits and created a whole approach based on using these traits, regardless of what your overall perspective was on how you help people. So that's how that came to me. I'm not a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a counselor, or a social worker, but I do things like work with at-risk kids. I actually started off my career as an English teacher in a high school for at-risk kids and have just really loved working with them ever since. So let me get into more of the serious piece of the content. As we work with riders, there's really, and mostly we're talking about kids like the Changing Leads program. Some of this is applicable if you're working with the Riding in the Moment program, but it's a little bit less appropriate for that as it is for the kids or the vets, people like that. And for riders who really want to work on behavioral change, there's two areas that they need to work on. One is self-exploration and the other is action. And those two things have to go together to produce lasting change. So the first thing they need to do is learn more about themselves. And some of the things they need to look at are their own behaviors, the way they think, how they feel about themselves, how they deal with stress, the patterns of their responses to other people in their life, and how they handle frustrating situations, disappointments, and other difficulties. So that's one of the things as a horse leader we can help them do is start looking at their own behavior and drawing some conclusions for that. And as they get to know themselves better, they learn to see relationships between causes and effects in their own lives. Then they need to take action if they want to make changes. And when they want to take action, they have to look at doing things like experimenting with new behavior or developing new methods for reacting to others and dealing with their own frustrations, or learning new ways of thinking about themselves and others, and most importantly, developing constructive behaviors to replace the self-defeating and destructive behaviors they're using now. That's all stuff that we can help them with, and the traits that we're going to talk about are really effective in helping folks do that. So I want to now just sort of briefly run through those traits and talk about what goes on within each of them. If you have questions, feel free to interrupt me. There's only 2 of you, so that's no problem at all. Feel free. So the first one I want to talk about is warmth. And warmth is a characteristic we're probably all pretty familiar with. One of the ways we express warmth is through positive comments of concern and affection for people. And that's really important with our riders because that supports self-exploration. It makes people feel like this is an environment I'm safe in. One of the things you have to think about with warmth is showing it appropriately. Some riders are going to be comfortable with more warmth. Some are going to be comfortable with less. And usually they'll be comfortable with less at the beginning, and then as your relationship develops, they'll be comfortable with more. But you've probably run into people where you wanted to come across as warm and their reaction was to back away. And lots of our riders do that same thing, especially in the beginning. I worked with a kid a couple of sessions ago, and he was extremely distant in the beginning. He didn't want to look at me. He didn't want to talk to me. And so my relationship with him for about the first 3 weeks was saying almost nothing. I would tell him what we were going to do. If he needed help, I would say, do you need any help? But I did not try and do any chat with him. I didn't ask him what was going on. How was your day? How are you? Nothing. And eventually he started to talk to me. And then when he did that, I knew that it was okay. I could start talking to him. And we sort of went on from there.
Just to interject, Michael, we have someone who just joined us.
Hello and welcome. Can you see and hear us okay? Looks like your audio is connecting.
Hello.
Okay. We just started going through the different traits of the effective helper. We talked about warmth as the first one. So we will press on. The second one is respect. And respect is really fundamental to the whole helping process. And when you are communicating respect to one of the riders, what you're really communicating is your belief in their worth as a person, independent of their behavior. Lots of our riders have behavioral issues, and we're saying it doesn't matter that you've been getting in trouble at school. We still think you're really cool and that you're a worthwhile person. Going along with that is our making sure they understand that we recognize their right to make their own decisions. And the way that comes across a lot of the time is we don't tell them what to do, we offer them options or ask them about options and choices so that they're sort of in the position of power making decisions. We also communicate the idea that mistakes happen and they're actually really useful because you can profit from your mistakes. And so we don't condemn people for mistakes. We we help them figure out what they can learn from it. And we encourage the riders to experiment with their behavior, both on and off the horse, and constantly try and communicate our faith in their ability to function effectively if they choose to. All of that sort of goes towards communicating respect towards the rider. The third one of the traits is genuineness. And genuineness is all about being truly yourself. As a horse leader or a sidewalker, you're filling a role, but you're not playing a role. There's an important distinction there. So when we're being genuine, our verbal and our nonverbal behavior is pretty congruent, and you're pretty much the same person in your helper role as you are outside the helper role. Let me give you an example of what would not be an example of genuineness. So you've got a rider and you're talking with her and you say, oh, of course I care about you, Mary. I mean, if you fall off the horse, that looks really bad for me as a volunteer. To the second half of what I said completely invalidated the first part of what I said and made it really clear that what I really care about is how I look, not what's going on for the rider. So that's the sort of thing we want to avoid being genuine. Like warmth, genuineness needs to be done appropriately, and you have to be careful that you don't vent your own feelings inappropriately by always focusing on what's going on for the rider. And you share what's going on for you to the extent that it supports the direction the rider's moving. So that's genuineness. The next one is concreteness, and concreteness is all about getting specific. This is where we help the rider look at the what, why, when, where, and how of their experience. And we ask questions like, when did that happen? What was it like? How did you feel? What were you thinking when that happened? When's the first time that happened, and how long has that been going on? So an example of that, I worked with a rider for a session who was extraordinarily anxious. And for 7 weeks, at some point in the lesson, she said, I'm too scared, I have to get off. I'm having a panic attack, I have to stop. And we would have to talk through that and help her resolve that issue. At the end of week 8, this girl had just barely trotted a horse. Her horse took off with her and cantered almost the entire way around the Lucky Hearts Arena. And I thought she would probably have a total panic attack about this. I ran after her. Not surprisingly, the horse was a lot faster than I was, so I didn't catch up with her right away. But I finally got up there. I said, how was that for you? And she replied, exhilarating. I was so happy, I practically cried. But that was a great opening to talk with her about how she felt during that moment, how she reacted to what would normally be a panic-inducing situation, so that she didn't panic, she took control of the situation and managed it beautifully. So that was just a perfect time for using this trait of concreteness. The next one I want to talk about is immediacy. And immediacy is kind of like concreteness. It's making sure that you communicate about things in the here and now. So for example, if I'm working with a rider and I notice that her hands are shaking, I might say, Jane, I notice your hands are shaking. How are you feeling? Or I might say something like, Sam, I notice you're really not looking at me and you're barely speaking to me. Are you mad at me? Or Joe, when I ask you to do something and you don't respond, it makes me feel like you don't respect me at all. So it's being very on top of what's going on right now and raising issues in sort of a non-threatening way, but making sure that they know that you know there's something going on. A lot of times, if there is an issue, raising it like this will help diffuse it and keep it from becoming a problem later on. The next one is potency. And potency is really personal charisma. And when you are communicating your personal power, your personal charisma, you're showing that you are in command of yourself and the situation. And that's really key to helping riders feel secure and safe, because they know you've got it. They don't have to feel like they have to make all the decisions. They have to be right all the time, because you're there and you're going to take care of whatever comes up. So you work to verbally and non-verbally communicate, I'm here to help you, you're safe, I'm going to work with you and make sure this is a valuable experience for you. The next one I want to talk about is self-disclosure. And this is the appropriate sharing of your own personal experiences, feelings, or attitudes. And the key to this is that it has to be appropriate and it has to keep the focus on the rider. When you do this, and you do it well and you do it at the right time, it can be the key for the rider making a huge change. Because the rider then knows that you've successfully overcome something that they did, and you become a guide who's been there and successfully gotten out of this situation. And that gives them hope and shows them that it can be done. So self-disclosure, when it's properly done, is really powerful. The next one I want to talk about is empathy. Empathy is tricky because a lot of times it gets confused with sympathy, and they're totally different things. Empathy is the ability to accurately observe, identify, and communicate your understanding of what the rider is feeling and experiencing. It's totally different from sympathy, which is saying, I'm sorry you feel that way. That's usually not very helpful. And there are actually 3 levels of empathy that I like to talk about. The first one is somebody who experiences no empathy at all. And so, for example, you could have a rider saying, I'm really feeling angry. This is just too hard. I can't get this horse to stop and I want to get off. And if you responded completely without empathy, you could say something like, yeah, I know, everybody feels that way at first, just keep trying. And that just doesn't evidence any of your observations, your understanding of what's going on. It just is, it's off-putting, and that kind of response is usually more harm than it is help. If you show a lower level of empathy, you could have the same statement, I'm really angry, this is just too hard, I can't get the horse to stop and I want to get off. You could respond with something like, hey, what you're saying makes total sense. It sounds like you're having a hard time stopping your horse and you want to get down. So in that situation, the person has understood what the rider was telling them, has repeated it back to them so they know they were heard, but they've added absolutely nothing to it. So it's better than the first response, but it's not really very helpful. At a higher level of empathy, your response adds to the rider's communication. So again, rider says, I'm really angry, this is too hard, I just can't get the horse to stop and I want to get off. Then you use your own understanding of what the rider's experience is to give back to them more than they communicated. And you could say something along the lines of, I can really feel your anger and frustration, and I don't blame you. Learning something new like this can really be frustrating, especially when you're riding a 1,500-pound animal. Let's talk about what we might do together to help you meet this challenge. So you've heard them, you've offered some understanding, and you've asked them if you can work together on working with that problem. That's a higher level of empathy and a much more useful response than either of the first 2. So that's a little bit about how you can use empathy. Then the last one I want to talk about is quite challenging for a lot of people, and it's confrontation. And the reason confrontation is so challenging is that our culture has a very negative attitude towards confrontation. And a lot of us try to avoid that at all costs. Yep. Done well, confrontation can be extremely powerful. And the confrontations that I'm talking about occur when there are discrepancies between what the riders say now and what they've said before, when what the rider is communicating verbally or non-verbally, or what the rider is saying about their experience and what you as the helper are observing. So we're really confronting them with discrepancies between 2 things that we're seeing. So let me give you some examples. One of the things you might see is a discrepancy between what the rider is saying and what they seem to be experiencing. I used this example a little earlier. You say you're doing fine, but your hands are shaking. Can you tell me a little bit about what's going on? So it's a very gentle confrontation. It's not challenging. We're just saying, you're saying this, but I'm seeing this. Let's talk about it. So that's an experiential confrontation. There's another kind of confrontation where the rider is professing to be weak, and you help them by confronting them and helping them realize that they are stronger than they think and they can actually meet the challenge. And that might be something along the lines of, you're saying that you're afraid and you can't do it, but remember when you were afraid to trot for the first time, but you rose to the occasion and you did great. So we're taking a past performance that they did where it was successful and bringing it to bear on a situation where they're afraid they're going to fail now. That's a strength conversation. There's a third type, which is a weakness confrontation, which happens when the rider says everything's fine and you know it's not. And that might come up with something where you would say, you're doing just fine, Joe, but your counselor told me last week you've been getting in fights at school. Can we talk about that? So you say you're doing great. I know there's a problem. Let's talk about it. That's a weakness confrontation. So there are experiential strength and weakness confrontations that you can use that can be really powerful with your riders. So those are the different traits. Does anybody have any questions about any of those before we move on and look at some scenarios?
I'm fine, thank you.
All right.
My dog is barking.
Okay, then we can take a look at some of the scenarios. Emmy, I don't know if you want to bring those up so people can see those as we talk about them. I know one person didn't have the handout, so that might be helpful. If you don't have them, I do. If you want to switch over to me, let me know.
Can everyone see it correctly?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, we can scroll down. Those are the 9 traits we just talked about, and here are the effective helper scenarios. Now, we're really lucky in talking about these scenarios because she's been quiet so far, but we have Brenda Thompson on the call. So Brenda, if you don't know, is someone with an enormous wealth of experience working with horses, working with our riders, and has really great suggestions for working with all the different scenarios we're going to be talking about. So Brenda, chime in as you feel like you want to. And just so you know, your audio is muted at the moment. Okay. So the first one we want to talk about, let me bring these over, is a situation where the rider is attempting to steer through a line of cones. And if you haven't been in the arena at all, we use little plastic traffic cones as things to help people learn how to control their horses. And one of the things we'll do is set up a line of cones, each of which is like 6 or 7 yards apart, and they have to weave through the cones to show that they can control the horse. So in this situation, the rider is trying to work through the cones, but the horse keeps veering towards the middle of the arena, and the rider is unable to bring them back on course. They come to a halt facing the middle of the arena, and they're just sort of stuck there. And the student tells you, the horse just isn't listening to me, I can't do it. How might you respond to a rider in that situation? There's no right answer here. There's lots of different ways to approach that. This is just a chance for us to share ideas about what we think would be helpful.
Anybody else? So much depends upon the kid and the horse. But you could ask questions as to what they've tried, or you could ask questions and move it back into their power, as to what might be a new way to look at it and a new way to communicate with the horse.
If you think back to the 9 traits that we talked about, do any of those seem like they would be useful in this kind of a situation?
I think if you look at the empathy and you look at level C or number C, where you could add the response, the horse just isn't listening to you, you can't do it, maybe something else might work. So you could help them through a problem solve, and how they can listen to the horse in return. So they might shift to, oh, wait a minute, maybe I need to listen to what the horse is telling me, because horses have their own little way of doing things. The other might be, I don't think the confrontation so much, but I think the empathy might help a lot.
Yeah, I think that's a good choice in this situation. Empathy and warmth. This is probably a frustrating situation for the rider, and feeling that you're going to be there and be supportive at this point is probably really helpful. Brenda, anything to add?
Yeah, also going off of what Shirley just said, and I've been using this lately in my teaching, you know, ask the rider, how can you help your horse to understand what it is you're asking him to do? So your horse is not doing this, we can see that. So how can you help your horse to be successful? And I really like that. I think both of those traits Shirley mentioned apply, and that's just another technique where you put it back to how can you help the horse understand.
I like that a lot. I like the words of helping the horse. You know, I said listen, but I think helping even gives the rider a little bit more of attention to, hey, I'm in a position where I can do something for the horse. That's nice.
I think that's a really good point. That's helping them feel powerful in a situation where they're probably not feeling powerful. Any other thoughts about what would be helpful in this situation?
I know Marnell has a lot of experience with kids in other teaching scenarios, so feel free to jump in if something comes up.
And I'm trying to reflect on that, and I'm kind of chuckling because not knowing anything about horses at all, I would be sitting there feeling exactly the same way. So empathy for sure, because the horse isn't listening to me. I probably would start laughing. I would just feel completely the same as the rider. But I like the suggestion of what have you tried? Is I use that often in the classroom when the student just is frustrated, and they usually will raise their hand and say, I don't get it. So what have you tried? You know, and it kind of turns the ownership back on them. And I love the idea of giving them the power, you know, of because right now they're feeling completely powerless. And
yeah, right.
Power, you know, that's really super important. And you know, people will always rise to the occasion of helping others, whether they, you know, think they will or not. I have yet to meet someone that won't rise to that occasion. So helping the horse is, you know, that's wonderful. So those were really, really good. But I had to laugh. I'm sure horses can be a little stubborn at times, and it would probably be a really big challenge for me as well to figure out how to get past that. So yeah, I like that though. A lot of this is having, I'm reflecting on being in the classroom. So it's very parallel.
Oh, yeah, I think you'll see a lot of overlap between those experiences.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I have, in a lot of the sessions that I've worked in, I have thought back to my years teaching what they referred to then as pre-delinquent youth.
Yeah, been there, done that.
Right, so as near as I could tell, that was any kid who hasn't been to jail yet.
And I just moved back into middle school, so
Oh
I think
my.
that pretty much covers almost every single one of them. So
Absolutely.
the nature of a 13-year-old. So yeah.
I'm a teacher too. I've been teaching my whole life, and I did do middle school for a few years.
Yeah.
So I do know what you mean. Yeah.
I equate it to aging in dog years while you're there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
But has its rewards as well. And I'm super excited to get involved with this because I feel like it'll just feed off of that too. Challenges and rewards. So
I think it absolutely will. I'm really glad you're going to be joining.
yeah. I'm so excited about this. I came home from pulling weeds for 2 hours. My husband said, "How did it go?" And I just said, "I love that place." I pulled weeds in my own front yard, and I just there's just a feeling of being there, and then just all of this completely connects to what makes me tick. So I'm really super jazzed.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
It absolutely is a place unlike any place I have ever been before. It's a place where magic happens almost every day.
Yeah, that's what I feel like, and I can't stop talking about it with friends that I've connected with over the last few weeks, and so I just I would love for all of this pandemic to just go so I can get back and get started and get going and
Right.
move forward.
Okay, let's take a look at the second one. The rider is just mounted and is on lead walking around the arena while the other riders mount. The rider is telling you all about her day at school. Once the last rider is mounted, the instructor begins giving directions, but the rider continues telling you about her day at school. How might you respond?
I'll jump in on that one.
Sure.
It reminds me of being in like a kindergarten, first, second grade classroom where you might just say, to the kiddo, "Hey, hold that thought. We really need to listen to the directions right now," and then be sure to get back to them, afterwards. But they, I know you're really excited to share this with me, but can you just hang on to that thought and we'll get right back to you.
Yeah.
I want to be sure to hear the directions, and I know you do too. So,
right.
Something along those lines.
Any other thoughts on this one?
I think that is kind of what I was thinking. That's really a beautiful way to respond to it, because you're recognizing them and saying what you have is really important, and that we'll get back to it, so that it isn't like just shutting them down, but we do need to do this right now. I don't know which of the traits that really drops into, warmth a little bit, but I always say I need to hear because I do, but I don't know. Is
Sure.
I don't know what trait that would be.
I think you're right. I think there's an opportunity for warmth to talk about how much you appreciate hearing about their day, especially if that's a kid who wasn't really open and talkative at the beginning. And then just bring them back to, you still need to hear what's going on now so we can do the things right in the lesson. And you might want to mention that you want to pick it up again at the end of class if there's time, and hear about the rest of their day.
It's kind of redirection, but also saying, hey, I'm not going to forget this.
Right.
So there's a little element of a respect in there going on.
Mm-hmm.
And also respect for the teacher.
Yes.
I've been, depending on my level of how I've connected with the kid, if it's somebody that I'm very familiar with, I might give them like a little high five or a knuckle, like a knuckle bump, or just, a side hug, kind of there with me. I hear that you're really excited and you want to share, and just to kind of let them know that I'm with them, but we're still going to respect and listen to the person that's talking.
Sure.
So just depending on, how physical or, how connected you are, how familiar you are with them.
Brenda, anything you want to throw in for this one?
No, I think both Marnell and Shirley are going to be great. Well, Shirley's already involved, but those were great answers.
Great.
The only thing I would add is make sure you repeat the instructor's directions as closely as you can using the same words if you can, so it's less confusing for the writer. And that really comes into play more with the TR classes, therapeutic writing. But some of these students may as well have a processing delay or have an attention problem, and just using the same phrases that the instructor used can be helpful. So it does help if you can actually hear what the instructor's saying.
One thing I do sometimes, because I do have some hearing issues, is I let the student know that I need their help for me to hear everything, and they may have to let me know what the teacher said. So it kind of, again, puts it in their ballpark. And that's just the truth. So that would be authenticity, I guess. Yeah.
I've done that too, where I've said, you know, I'm brand new here and I really need to listen to what's going on. And again, it puts them in the role of being in charge, power, you know, kind of like to help me. So that's been effective as well.
Okay, great. So the third one is writers have been asked to trot from the letter K to H. And if you haven't been in the arena, we have alphabet signs up around so we can point to different areas. That's what that's referring to. So they've been asked to trot. You've helped this writer trot in previous lessons, and you're clipped on, but the writer seems really nervous. And the writer says, I don't want to trot. I can't get the horse to stop.
Well, I'd recognize their feelings. I don't know which one that is. Is that empathy too?
Yep, that would be empathy.
And warmth, of course. Warmth's just going to be there. And you could restate what they said and then kind of move it from that space. The other would give some, the other thing I might do, I've worked with kids that, well, that one little girl I told you, is give them some strategies in how to work with their feelings once we've recognized those feelings, like breathing, or, you know, take 5, or coming up with some ways to respond again to the horse, or how can you help the horse stop? Those are just ideas. Yeah. That's all. Are you gone?
Brenda, anything to add to this one?
Just letting them know that you're there and you've got them. Like Michael, I don't remember which trait that was, but you know, I've got you. You're safe with me. I know what I'm doing, and I'll help you get through this, kind of a thing. And that way they'll feel more secure.
The potency. Is that the one?
Yep, that was the one.
Okay.
Would there be procedures in getting the horse to stop that the rider would have been trained and or taught that you could maybe review? Is that appropriate?
Absolutely, yes. If they're trotting, they should be prepared for that. And yeah,
I would think that would be on the list of things to know, but you know.
Yes, and you as the volunteer would also have techniques and strategies. And if you ever didn't feel comfortable, you should definitely step up to the instructor and say, I think I need your help with this. And the instructor can always come over and take the place of the volunteer if the volunteer's nervous, because that will feed into the rider and the horse. So you can always speak up and say, I think I need your help with this, and have the instructor take your place as the volunteer if you're not ready for it.
That's been really helpful to me to be able to do that, because each horse is so different in their way that they deal with things. And so, and I have my horses, and I know my horses, but you know, it's really different because you've got different personalities there too. And so it's really helpful for an instructor to come in and give me guidance as to how to work with that particular horse. And then I can help the student or child, whatever, a little bit better.
And Marnell, this is a sort of off-topic comment, but just because you haven't had a chance to work with the instructors, this is the most amazing bunch of people I have ever worked with.
I can just tell you get such a sense
Just
of
a minute,
it.
honey. Just a minute.
Just walking in, you get a sense of that just being there. I can't wait. I really can't wait. I'm really excited to make some connections with people. You know, and again, I just moved here a year ago, so I'm looking forward to making some friends there and just having a lot in common, you know.
Yeah.
So very excited. I can't wait.
No matter what happens, the only thing they provide is support.
Awesome.
It's just amazing.
Awesome.
Okay, we had one issue came up at the beginning that we were going to talk about. It's about 10 of 6 now, so I wanted to take a look at that.
Oh, that's, yeah, exactly that situation. Yeah.
Hmm.
And that happens more than once.
Yes, yeah, I think I've run into that a couple of times too. Thoughts about good ways to deal with a rider who's all of a sudden just panicked about the idea of getting on a horse.
I think my question, not being very familiar with horses at all, would it be trying to get past the frozen part of it is I think you've got to understand what's causing that. Is it the size of the horse? Is it, I don't know, something that went on during their day? I might start asking them some questions and taking baby steps. You know, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. I could see where I would use empathy in this one because I could totally see myself being in this situation. They're very big animals and they might be a little difficult to feel like you can control them. So I don't know, I guess just kind of trying to get to the root of what would be causing that. And I'm kind of assuming that it might be the size and the control issue. So giving the child or the person, the rider, control of some kind, and taking baby steps.
I think the concreteness, specific questions, you know, and finding out where's the frozen from, and it could be from like 10 years ago. I mean, really, we've got trauma kids.
So true.
And then the immediacy, what's going on now, and what is the issue, which you just talked about. We'll recognize what's going on here. And then the baby steps is huge, I think. So you're not saying, wow, let's just jump on that horse. Let's go a little closer, and maybe, and the baby steps may take until the next day, the next session.
I'm going to relate a story. I taught swimming back many years ago when I was 18. That was how I got into teaching, but I taught swimming and was a lifeguard. And there was a woman that came to me. She was in her late 80s, and it was a bucket list item to learn to swim. And she shared with me on the very first lesson, we did private lessons, the very first lesson, that she almost drowned when she was 12. And so we had a good, 70 years of fear to try to get past. And frozen solid, couldn't get her in the pool. And it took weeks, but we did one little step, and control was the key. Having her feel that she was in control of an environment that she felt very out of control in, that was the ticket. So when you said the frozen thing, I can see her face, as if it was yesterday. And we got past it, and she managed to swim a lap in the pool, and we all had a very big celebration afterwards.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's kind of similar situation, just the the control thing.
I've been frozen in different situations sometimes, and how do you work through that? You know, and you can kind of find that sense of, you could even communicate, wow, I was scared of it, not particularly with a horse, but, you know, in a different situation, that feeling is what we all feel at some point or another.
For sure.
I know for me, when I get frozen in situations, the longer I'm frozen, the least likely I am to get unfrozen.
Right.
That's where our volunteers can really be really helpful, because sometimes it takes something outside of you to get you that, just that first step propelling you forward to get you unfrozen. And it's hard to do that by yourself or on your own, but to have that person who's there supporting, that you have a rapport with, you have a relationship with, that you trust, to help you make that first step.
Well, and that whole thing of, Brenda, you talked about it, of letting them know you're there for them and that you're going to help them through it, and that strength that you, whether you're feeling it or not, whether you have the, but they feel like you're a safe place. That might be another thing to add in there.
Yes, and you can always bring in another volunteer or another staff member too. Like, let's say Michael has worked with me in a program called Cooper Home, which is a post-high school transitional program for students with intellectual disability. And we've had this fear issue, and we'll bring in additional helpers to be sidewalkers. And that just provides an extra element of support, both physical and emotional, and helps that rider feel more safe if they've got somebody right there looking at them saying, I've got you, we're going to do this together. So if you're ever in a volunteer situation where you're thinking, gosh, I wish I had another person, you know, speak up, because Emmy can come out of her office, she's always got boots, and get, you know, and get there and maybe just be that extra little help to get the person past a fear.
I thank you for saying that, because that brings me back to this first little girl I was talking about. Is Rachel got somebody, I was holding the horse, but Rachel got somebody on the other side, so the little girl didn't feel like she was going to, you know, catapult over to the other side and not land on the horse. And then it took a couple sessions with 2 sidewalkers and me leading. And then she started saying, no, wait a minute, I don't need these people. You know, she said it herself. She always had me leading, but she, little by little, let go of the sidewalkers because she felt like she could balance. So thank you for saying that. Yeah.
I had a situation. Go ahead, Marnell.
I was just quickly going to say another thought that is, depending on the age and, you know, appropriate level, but just having a goal in mind, having an end goal in mind, maybe helps them. I know it works for me, but it helps me get past the fear of not being able to do it right now. Again, with the swimmer, you know, her goal was to just get to the other end of the pool. And you know what I mean? And having that end goal in mind kind of helps get past the immediate fear that you're feeling right now. If just getting on the horse without going over to the other side is simply solved by putting somebody on the other side, you know what I mean? And practicing that a few times, and just, you know, just having a vision, having a goal in mind of where you want to go might kind of help as well.
Mm-hmm.
I like that a lot. And you made me think of being flexible with our goals too. So like with your lady,
Yes.
you didn't say we're going to jump in the water and swim across the first day, even though that was the goal.
Yeah.
But sometimes we can go, wow, you made this baby step today. Let's have the baby step goals, and each one can build on another. Then it doesn't feel so big.
Yeah.
You can get on the horse. You don't have to move, you know,
Right.
or let's just take 2 or 3 steps today. And then let's see if we can go down one side of the arena today. And, you know, I think that takes some of the fear out too.
For sure.
Thank you for your ideas. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good approach. I actually had a student who was in a situation very similar to this with in one of the Cooper Home classes. And she was okay getting on the horse until she realized that she was sitting on the horse. And then she was terrified. She started to cry. She couldn't do anything. She just wanted to get off. And another one of the instructors came over and was talking to her and being very sympathetic and very understanding, and said, I tell you what, just try one step and see how you feel. If you want to get off at that point, you can get off. And she did do one step, and then she talked her through it again and did another step. And she talked her one step at a time until we'd gone maybe 20 feet. And by the time we'd done that, she wasn't scared anymore. She was fine, and she was great for the rest of the lesson. And so that one little piece at a time just was the perfect approach in that situation, along with a lot of understanding and empathy. Okay, it is 6 o'clock. We were scheduled to go for an hour. We have three more of the scenarios to talk about. If you want to, would you like to continue, or have you had enough? Would you like to end?
I have time. I'm all for learning. Bring it on.
Okay.
I've got about 10 minutes I can spend.
I think
Okay.
I have 10 or 15 minutes. Yeah.
I'm game. I'm ready.
All right, why don't we take one more of the scenarios and see where we are. And if it takes all 10 minutes to talk about that, then we'll be done. Does that work for everybody?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so this one says, during the lesson, the instructor gives a set of directions with 3 or 4 steps. The rider begins to execute the first step, then gets lost and says, I don't know what to do. I just can't do this. What would be some good ways to respond to that?
I have to make sure I remember them too.
Yep.
You know? Again, we want to reframe it, maybe, so that the can't gets into you don't feel like you can do it right now, or the can't changes to well, you can do the first step, let's try there, and then maybe we'll remember from there. But I think reframing it for them, so that's the empathy thing. And then working together with them so that maybe right after the directions are given, we review them together and make sure we both know what to do. The ideas, that's all.
This happens like by the minute in the classroom. So
Yeah.
I think I would probably just ignore the I can't do this phrase, and I would just focus on the directions. I might say, well, you knew the first step. Let's go over the next 2 or 3 steps that the instructor gave. You know, help me remember what they were. Let's just talk them through, and then see if we can execute it. But I probably wouldn't focus too much on the I can't do this, because that's just they all say that.
Right.
But I would probably just focus on the you know, the actual direction given and trying to execute that.
Mm-hmm.
Just rephrasing it, just repeating it. I you know, even in class, I'll say, you know, turn to your neighbor and see if they can repeat it, or tell each other, you know, the steps. So I might say to the writer, if I knew that this was a writer that maybe this happens often, maybe there's somebody that can only deal with maybe 1 or 2 directions at a time, I might say to them before they get started, tell me what you just heard, you know, repeat, let's go through the steps, and
Right.
something like that. Set them up for success before we even get started. But that takes kind of getting to know your writer as well.
I like tell me what you just heard, because then you know what they have processed, and it might be totally different than what is happening.
Yeah.
The other thing is, it's certainly fine to ask the instructor again, that asking questions is a fine thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
I think.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. See if the writer can self-advocate and say, oh, are you stuck? Well, what can you do to help yourself out? Should you ask for help? Would that be a good idea? We do that a lot with that post-high school transition class. That's one of our big goals with them. And of course, it depends on your writer, but I love both your responses. Those are great.
It is so important for them to take ownership of it, as well. The more, I mean, I tend to be one that jumps in to try to rescue, and I have to constantly remind myself, put the ownership on them. And I found that when I can do that and remember to do that, then they get to the point where they can hear 2 or 3 or maybe 4 directions, and they grow in that area as well. They can take on more because somebody's not going to just jump in there and save them. But being a mother and being a, whatever, I tend to jump in and save rather than realizing that, if they work through this, that's a growth, that's a step in the right direction on their part. So.
And it's okay not to be up with the other people.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes in a class of 3, which it usually is 3 to 4 max, there'll be somebody that's already doing everything. And so that whole idea of, hey, it's okay to be exactly where you are and who you are. It's okay if we just do the first step for a little while, even though other people might be in a different place. And we don't need to compare ourselves with anybody else. That's a little, I wouldn't use those words, but that idea, and say, wow, this is really great that you remembered that. And then if we need to recheck and see what the next step is, that's cool. But
Right.
I'm remembering places where it was really, really good to be able to not always have to be at the same pace as everybody else for kids that needed that extra time.
And a lot of these kids that are at risk, are at risk because they weren't at the same place as everybody else and comparing themselves to everybody else, and they've fallen behind, and it's just a vicious cycle. And for them to be okay with where they are right now at that point, and grow from there, that's a very healthy attitude to have. And it's a big hurdle to overcome.
Yeah.
Brenda, anything you want to add? We're just about out of time, so I figure we'll give you the last word.
Okay, just on that vein, you guys are totally right about it being okay for a writer to be on step 1 if the rest of the class is going on to 2, 3, and 4. And I love it as an instructor when a horse leader is confident enough to say to their writer, it's okay, let's just try this. Just because the instructor said do A, B, C, and D, we don't have to do that if you're not ready. Like if the instructor said, go to the orange cone and then go to the red cone and pick up a ring, and you didn't make it to the orange cone, it's okay to not have to go get the ring. Like some volunteers get really stuck with following the rules and the directions, and they kind of drag the rider around and take over. And we don't want that. We want the independence of the rider to always be at the forefront. So I really like how you both answered that with, it's okay if we're kind of taking our time here. And you can say, hey, to the instructor, we're going to do this, just so they know. But I think that's great when horse leaders are that confident, where they go, yeah, we need to sit here for a moment and kind of assess ourselves. So well put. I can't wait to work with both of you.
We have to make that thing go away, that virus thing.
Yes.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to coming back whenever it happens that I can.
Yeah, I feel like I drove by, saw the sign, got all excited, signed up and did, and then just, this holding pattern is the worst.
Well, I'm very impressed at how you're like doing absolutely everything that you can do, even with the limited options.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I figured it's kind of like that with my classroom in moving back to middle school, you know, coming from elementary back to middle school. I have a whole office set up downstairs in the basement, and I just go down there and, you know, grab whatever I can, read whatever I can, get familiar with the standards, because now you have the time. So take advantage of having the time. It's such a gift, you know, so.
Okay, well, thanks for coming tonight, guys. I hope this was helpful. If you think of things that you have questions about later, feel free to send them to Emmy. She can forward them on to me. I'll be happy to get back to you. And hope everybody has a good night. And I look forward to seeing you all on the property sometime soon.
Michael,
Thank you. It was excellent. Absolutely.
Yeah, I want to thank you so much for all of these suggestions and ideas, and just know that they are useful not only at Hearts and Horses, but they will come in handy in my classroom, and I really appreciate you sharing them.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Really interesting and wonderful to kind of jog me back into the Hearts and Horses place. All of your suggestions are wonderful, and I do share these things with my classes too. So,
great.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
All right, thanks everybody. Take care, Brenda. Thanks again for your help.
Have a good night.
You
Thanks.
too.